This session is all about India and US space partnership. It's basically 2.0, technology, trust, and strategic growth. As India and the US deepen strategic space ties through Artemis Accord, NISAR, enhanced investment and dual-use innovation, the dialogue explores trusted partnerships, market access, policy alignment, and the future of Indo-Pacific space leadership. That is going to be one of a great session, and I would like to now call our esteemed moderator, Colonel Shailendra Arya, Senior Advisor, the Asia Group. We welcome you, sir. Can we have a round of applause? Thank you. And our esteemed speakers, with no particular order, Mr. Gaurav, Seth, founder and CEO of PierSight. Can we also have you, sir? Mr. Anubhav Kumar, Head of Strategy and Government Policy, Boeing, India and Southeast Asia. We welcome you too. We have Mr. George Weinmann, founder, Space Habitat Company, HabSpace. Can we have you there too, sir? And last but not the least, Mr. Guduru, USIBC. We welcome you all, and I hand over. Can we have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, so that before we start an amazing session? Thank you, and I request everyone to settle down, and towards the back, I may request everyone to network during our high tea break, if that's possible. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, and I thank all of you for being here, and welcome our panelists here. Today's panel is on India-US space partnership and what we can do together. Before we move ahead, let me just give you a very brief background on what India and US have already done together in the space sector. US has been a key partner for our space partnership. At G2G level, we have in 2022, during the 2+2 ministerial, India and US signed a space security, space situational awareness agreement in which they share data on space debris and assets. At military level, they run an advanced domain space dialogue or defense dialogue. India also participates in US Spacecom's multilateral exercise called Global Sentinel. And under INDUSX, many startups, including from the space, are working together. As you are all aware, last year, the ISRO and the NASA, they launched a joint Earth observation mission called NISAR. And of course, the big event of last year, wherein Group Captain Shukla traveled, that was also an India-US partnership. There have been some more initiatives with US, such as to make chips for the defense and the space industry, including the US Space Force. We have had large number of outside of India, maximum investment to the space sector has come in from US. You are aware of some of those investments. Google has invested in Pixel. Halogen Group has acquired one of the space companies here. Some of the other US VC and P funds, they are investing in Indian space startups and Indian companies. Where I work, we have a DC office, so we do get a lot of interest on the space side of it, especially they consider Indian space sector to be very full of potential and a low risk area because of the dual use. Lastly, I would like to say that more and more American companies are partnering with India, such as Amazon, and there are even possibilities to partner or to have a technology partnership in upcoming programs of India, such as space-based surveillance and few others. So with this little bit of background, I stop here. I will request my panelists to make a short 2 minutes remarks. After that, I'll ask them questions, and in the end, we'll open it up for some Q&A. Maybe I can start with Gaurav from one side. Gaurav, They also have an office in US. And Gaurav, I'll request you to make initial remarks.
Hi everyone, I'm Gaurav Seth, founder and CEO of PierSight. We are a company developing synthetic aperture radar sensors for space-based maritime surveillance, as well as synthetic aperture radar sensors for UAVs to see through foliage cover, etc. We are also developing India's first SAR constellation for the PPP model. And before starting this company, I used to be in ISRO. In fact, my last mission I worked on was NISAR. So very happy to see a mention of that.
Thank you, Shailendra, and the organizers for having me here. I'm actually joining on behalf of our Executive Director, Jacob Galish. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it today. But just to give you a brief introduction about USIBC, we are a 50-year-old organization. We are empaneled within the US Chamber of Commerce and sort of look at policy advocacy in US and India across various sectors. And I lead strategic technologies, including space, as one of the sectors. So as far as the US-India space is concerned, I think we need to sort of begin with a caveat. I think in the intro we had mentioned this term Indo-Pacific, which clearly has changed overnight with the Indo-PACOM sort of dropping Indo from the name itself. So I think there seems to be some sort of divergence at the moment, but I think hopefully we'll be able to identify over the course of this conversation some areas for convergence between US and India.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really enthralled to be on this panel. I represent Boeing. I lead strategy and government policy for Boeing in India and Southeast Asia. Space has been an area of collaboration, as Colonel Arya mentioned that, obviously NISAR was one of the projects, but there have been many more collaborations. We constantly are on the lookout for opportunities for collaboration. We have been working with ISRO on specific opportunities and evaluating areas like human space flight, some of the solar cell technologies, because we have large subsidiaries which work on solar cells. We have Millennium Systems that work on small satellites, and then obviously we have the Space and Launch Division. So that's an exciting and important area for us to continue to partner in this area.
Hello everyone, George Weinmann. So I started my career at this age in India when I was with Blue Origin, and a couple of years ago I left Blue Origin and restarted my entrepreneurial career and created Astroworks Ventures as a venture studio to develop new space projects. One of those is called HabSpace, or Space Habitat Company, and the idea behind that is to develop a large international consortium of countries modeled after the Intelsat consortium from the 1960s and 70s, to develop a large international space station module that will integrate with other space station modules in orbit, predominantly one from the United States. And so we're excited to tell you more about that, and I guess we'll have some discussions in the Q&A. But suffice to say that space is becoming quite a global endeavor, and there's a lot of opportunity for technology, trade, and services in low Earth orbit, which will be better facilitated when we can have a common facility that everyone can scale and grow with.
Oh, thanks, everybody. I'll quickly ask some questions. So maybe I'll start with Gaurav first. Recent conflict in West Asia showed that there's a need for persistent surveillance of contested waters such as Strait of Hormuz. I know your company is working to combine SAR and AIS, Automated Information System, to provide all-weather 24/7 surveillance. So how will you, once you have your satellite ready, how will you pitch into the maritime domain awareness from the military perspective or surveillance perspective? It is called maritime domain awareness. And India and US have been working for it. Some of the US companies such as Hawkeye are partnering with India. And how can we do better in terms of MDA? How can it also feed in Quad? There is a maritime domain awareness specific Quad initiative called IPMDA. So how do you think all this converging together, Gaurav?
Firstly, quickly telling people about SAR. So it's a technology which can see through clouds and image during nighttime, because we throw our own light. However, when done on small satellites, the problem of getting persistent is that these satellites do not operate continuously. That's something we've done very uniquely at PierSight. We have developed a state-of-the-art synthetic aperture radar sensor which can operate for a very long duration. And we plan to launch 32 satellites such that you don't have to task SAR images over the oceans, but rather it's available as a feed. So we want to move the industry from reactive monitoring to proactive monitoring, right? And that's exactly, as we develop and launch this constellation, we'll be able to focus with high revisit over sensitive areas of the quad, right? And that's something we provide very, very uniquely as a company. Also mentioning how it's different from Hawkeye 360 or RF sensing technologies, I see as SAR as a superset there, that if a ship goes into complete radio isolation, no RF sensing can detect it. However, synthetic aperture radar can image it still, right? So it can very well be used in a tip and cue format along with RF sensing, where RF sensing can do the first sort of a wide scanning, and then a SAR image can determine what kind of vessel it is, right? Though it's a dark vessel, whether it's a shipping vessel, it's a naval vessel, all those details can be available from our sensors. Recently, there was an American boat during the war which had completely turned off all forms of communication. They were literally navigating using the stars. So for that kind of a scenario as well, our technology will be the only one which would be able to provide information.
Thanks. Can I just quickly ask you a supplementary question? So, you get RF and then you get SAR. So you have basically, you know that the vessel is suspicious or gray or black, and the vessel is, this is how it looks like. But will it also require a formal identification at a subsequent stage by sending somebody there? Or how do you think this information will be made use by maritime law enforcement or militaries?
No, so correct. So let's first start with how it's currently done. Currently, majority of the monitoring happens through ships, speedboats, or helicopters, aircrafts, right? What we want is that once we effectively determine what kind of a vessel it is, then these, assets are used to go and catch. But the first line of detection should be using remote sensing. Satellites have a unique advantage. Satellites move at about 8 kilometers per second in space, and we can cover several hundreds of square kilometers every second, right? So essentially, that is the future where proactive monitoring happens through RF sensing, SAR sensing over the oceans, and then reactive measures are taken by sending helicopters, speedboats, etc.
Thanks. I'll jump quite a bit from chasing say suspicious objects to a little bit of connecting to US. Samir, you as you just said in your introduction, US-India Business Council is housed in the US Chamber of Commerce. So US is, still remains one of the countries wherein we are seeing some investments in India, and in particularly in the space sector. So there are a lot of space companies here and in India who are desirous to make this connect to the US. So how do you think that these Indian space startup could reach out to the American setup, American P companies, VCs, the Silicon Valley people?
Thank you, Shailendra. So I think it was last year around this time, I was on the same panel, and I sort of was indicating that there's a lot of conversation happening on orbital data centers in the US and startups working on that, and it seems like the conversation in India also has moved in that direction. I'm just sort of making that point to emphasize that there seems to be a lot of convergence of late, and I think we need to sort of have that high-level picture that is painted on what's happening and what is about to come. So on the good news front, even though there seems to be this issue with the bilateral partnership, but at the end of the day, both the governments are going to meet early August in the civil space working group to sort of like carry forward the conversation and identify sectors of mutual interest. In fact, the NISAR project was an outcome of the US-India Civil Space Working Group conversations that happened previously, and I was fortunate enough to actually witness the launch in person in Sriharikota. As far as the opportunities itself are concerned, I think one of the primary focus going to be space situational awareness, which was also mentioned in the previous panel by one of the speakers, which seems to be a very important theme of conversation bilaterally and of course at a multilateral level as well. I think organizations that are like at the global level looking at space situational awareness as a very important sector for convergence for industry across the board, from the G7 to Quad and between US and India as well. Aside from that, I think particularly for the US-India track, there is a plenty of opportunity as far as, like for the orbital data centers, you require a lot of laser communication links. And there are companies in the US that have already sort of demonstrated this technology in a big way. So that I think will definitely become a certain focus area for the startups going forward here in India. And as far as investment opportunities by VCs are concerned, some of our members, including Celesta Capital, are already sort of invested in a lot of Indian startups like Agnikul Cosmos based in Chennai. So I think it is about how we can sort of paint that picture in the US. One of the things that I've been trying to lead over the last couple of years, particularly in terms of policy advocacy in the US, is to look at market access for Indian companies. But unfortunately, what is missing is this collectiveness of Indian startups. Unfortunately, everything is happening in a piecemeal manner, but there is no conjoined, joint effort in order to like go reach out to the US government and make a meaningful advocacy over there. I think that critical element has to be brought into picture. I think the government of India can definitely help startups in multiple manner, particularly in events like the satellite show that happens annually in the US, in Washington, DC. Have a booth for Indian startups, for example, collectively, to showcase that so much innovation is happening in India. I think that conjoined effort is absolutely necessary at the moment. A few other points that I've also noted down is, I think US and India have to be a little more ambitious. I think being two poles of democracy on either sides of the planet, I think there is plenty of opportunity for us to sort of look at planetary GPS, which is a proposal that I'm actively trying to push to both the governments, trying to understand how we can work together and create these deep space networks for communication as well, particularly for why don't we come together and create this deep space communication network that will aid actually a lot of other countries as well, which is also a commercial opportunity for Indian companies and the US companies to collectively work together. Going forward, of course, the International Space Station, as we all know, is going to get decommissioned in 2030. Why are we not discussing that at the bilateral level, and where industry, both in the US as well as in India, can come together and sort of push that narrative. Aside from that, I have also made a note of SATCOM, which is also a very important sector going forward, particularly when we are talking about maritime domain awareness and SATCOM integration and long-range links. I think there definitely is a massive opportunity for both India and US to look at and cover the entire region, including the Indian Ocean as well as the Pacific Ocean. And one final thing, I think that the governments can actually push. Someone mentioned about IDEX in the last panel as well. Why can't we come together and sort of like bring forward a few joint challenges of requirements both by US and India, and work on them and push the startups to sort of innovate and come up with novel solutions?
Thank you. Thanks, Samir. I think there was a little bit of effort from the government side when we conducted the INDUSX in United States. One edition took place in Stanford, where about a dozen plus Indian startups were taken and showcased, and it did develop, they did get some traction with the US primes. So now I shift to, in fact, the US prime Boeing and to Anubhav. Boeing has a long-standing relationship in India. You are working with big Indian primes such as Tata's, also HAL, in many fields, component manufacturing, space situational, etc. So do tell us a little about the future possibilities in space, what you're planning, and in particular, with the smaller Indian companies, how can you potentially support them or work with them?
Yeah, thanks. I think I want to briefly provide first a perspective about what Boeing is already doing. We do sourcing of close to 12 to 13,000 crores every year from India at this point of time, which is close to It varies between 1.2 to 1.4 billion dollars, but that's the sourcing that we do from close to 300 plus suppliers. So we have a very robust ecosystem of supplier base that supports both commercial, defense, and obviously space and a lot of other programs. So I think that is something which we are very proud of, because we have almost doubled the amount of sourcing that we have been doing from India, and that just demonstrates the capability of the Indian suppliers, both on the component side and on the system side. The key focus areas that remain for us is structures, primary structures, secondary structures. There is a lot of electrical wiring harness work that we do, a lot of electronics work which is coming up the curve. And that's been really our journey. The interesting data point that we have is, out of the 300 plus suppliers that we have, more than 25% of them are actually MSMEs. And MSMEs are the one where there is a lot of effort that we put in, just in terms of how they move up the curve on the value chain, because aerospace in general, and space again more specific, is very regulated when it comes to certifications, when it comes to standards, when it comes to the control levels which are there. And that is an area where we have a dedicated supply chain team which is based out of Bangalore, which is constantly scouting for newer suppliers, newer component providers, and then helping them move up the curve. Once you are within the Boeing supply chain, it does not matter whether you are supplying to a commercial 737 aircraft, or you are supplying to, let's say, a P-8I, which is a defense aircraft, or you are supplying to the space and launch group. Once you are into that ecosystem, then you can obviously participate and bid based on that. But I think that is the first step where you can become aware about the sourcing that happens, the components and the categories. And when we do sort of biannual sort of workshops where we invite a lot of suppliers and MSMEs to be a part of it. So that said, I think we have a very strong base and foundation, and we are constant, and we have great success stories where suppliers from other industries. So for example, Motherson, which is an automotive supplier, now is a thermoplastic supplier for Boeing. Rossell, Texas, which used to sell kebabs, is now one of the largest suppliers for electrical wiring harness for Boeing. Azad Engineering, Aqua. So there are enough and more suppliers that we have sort of developed, and we are proud that when we develop these suppliers, they help broaden the ecosystem, and the value proposition for a lot of these supplier ecosystems is not only the cost differentiator, but also the quality and the turnaround time at which they are efficiently operating. So that just summarizes that whatever opportunity comes up in space, we are going to look at the same base of suppliers, and we are looking at developing some of them. Space has a slightly unique requirement, just in terms of the supply chain has to be very close knit with the program, because the volumes are not too high. There is a lot of testing that goes in, and hence there is, I would say, not reluctance, but there is very nuanced sort of components that can really go outside of the bases where we are operating a lot of that. Whereas when you look at commercial and defense, it's slightly more widespread than just the pure space. But there is enough and more opportunities that we see to sort of capture the growth which is coming. Okay.
Thanks, Anubhav. My next question is to George. You are developing commercial modules for LEO space stations, and India and US also have a framework for human space flight, under which Group Captain Shukla traveled. But at the same time, we have ISRO, which has announced its plan to build its own orbital platform, Bharatiya Antariksh Station, Bharatiya Indian Antariksh Space Station. Where do you see India in such a partnership? Is there a meeting point? What are the possibilities with India?
Sure, this is a great question, and I think I'll take a moment just to briefly describe what is the HabSpace consortium that we're proposing, because I think most people are not very familiar with that. So this started because the International Space Station is retiring, and there are an increasing number of countries that are interested in participating in human spaceflight, microgravity research, and exploration. And so on the one hand, you've got this great facility that is going to retire and eventually deorbit in 2030, 2031. And then you have more and more countries that are interested in participating. But ISS is not really open to new members, even though there are some visitors. They're kind of getting like a visitor's pass as opposed to a true membership. And so the replacement for that, NASA has proposed commercial LEO destinations, and there are several competitors proposing to build that station. But that's an American station with American ownership and American supply chains predominantly, with some opportunity for international participation. But that international participation is just somewhat limited because it has to be predominantly a US station. And yet we realize that the world is not getting smaller in terms of international participation in human spaceflight. It's getting bigger, and more countries want to participate. We actually did a little bit of research and realized that when countries reach a certain level of GDP, their participation rate in terms of the number of countries who would fly goes from 10% to 35% to 55% and seems to be increasing. And so as countries are getting wealthier, we're getting more and more countries want to participate. So we realized that there's a model for this. Back in the 1960s, when there was only two institutions that could fly telecommunications satellites, the Soviet Union and the United States. But telecommunications was beneficial to everybody. And microgravity research and participation in the low Earth orbit economy, likewise, is beneficial to everyone. It's not something you want to be left behind in that sense. Like some people get to do better science and everybody else has to live with second tier sort of 20th century science. That's not a good idea. So the idea is to take this Intelsat-like consortium, which was this consortium of countries that developed telecommunications satellites for everyone to use, and adapt that model of international project finance to build an international module, a large one, about 300 cubic meters, a little bit less, but about that size, that will then integrate with a US commercial LEO destination, whichever one NASA eventually decides to select. So that's essentially what we're doing. Now the question is, how does India participate? I think, India participates in a number of things internationally, whether it's in ComSats or various other associations, the Artemis Accords, and none of those things of India's engagement and participation with the rest of the world limit India from doing its own satellites or other activities. And I think the same will be true for the low Earth orbit activities. So we know there are a number of companies in India developing return vehicles, for example. There's a number of companies in India developing microgravity science applications. And of course, there's the opportunity for the new space station idea. The one thing I'll say about space stations is building your own space station and operating it by yourself is a little bit of a lonely affair, because one of the main benefits of an international space station is the collaboration with others. You get to share. And that means that the companies that are doing research at that facility can leverage things that other companies are doing from around the world. Likewise, transportation and logistics. If everybody has their own space station, well, that's fun and it's prestigious, but at the end of the day, you're only going to have a limited amount of logistics to your station, which means the frequency of turning over astronauts and payloads is going to be limited. Whereas if you group everybody together into a larger facility, now you're going to increase the cadence and frequency of logistics, which is going to drive easier industrialization and commercial use, which is going to create more opportunities for companies and institutions across the world, as well as in India, and the opportunity for trade. And I think India has so much to offer in the world of international trade when it comes to space that it would be a shame if India was limited in its ability in terms of like global participation. Now, one last comment on this. From the US point of view, we think, or at least my group thinks that more international collaboration and a stronger model of international collaboration will actually be good for the United States as well as the rest of the world. It creates a rising tide, more and more participation, more stimulation, more collaboration, and we think that's going to really drive the low Earth economy. So I think there's plenty of room, and room for Indian modules to be part of an international space station, and room for India to do its own thing as we move also to the moon after low Earth orbit.
Oh, thanks. So yes, you're right. You know, policy-wise, we have a lot of convergences, particularly after India joined Artemis Accord. So there's nothing to preclude. So I'll ask very small, very brief questions now before we open the house. Back to Gaurav. You are also developing a forest penetration, payloads, and this is mainly a defense application. And in terms of defense, US is the biggest market now with their defense budget going up to crossing $1 trillion compared to $86 billion we have. So how do you plan to, how do you look at US market in terms of defense and other applications of your technology?
Thanks. So firstly, to introduce the product, it's called Vidura. It's a drone-mounted UHF SAR system, which works in long wavelengths such that it can penetrate through forest and detect activity through it. Apart from defense, there are certain civilian use cases as well. For example, monitoring deforestation, illegal logging, etc. Now coming back to Shailendra's question, so we essentially have built a payload which is a plug and play with any drone provider. So currently we are selling it to the Indian defense, as well as we are open to selling it to other countries such as the US. And the model we are looking at there is we want to partner with a drone-based OEM, preferably a local drone-based OEM in that country, to whom we can supply these sensors and they can directly be mounted to the drone and used as a plug and play.
Thanks, Gaurav. Quickly, I'll come to you, Samir. Between India and US and within India, there have been a lot of changes, policy changes. We have had some changes in the FDI norms. We have a new defense acquisition procedure coming up. We have India-US FTA, which we are closely tracking, underway as USIBC. So, what are those policy hurdles or regulations which both Indian and US companies should closely pay attention to?
Thank you, Shailendra. In fact, we have had a big opportunity to sort of like provide our inputs a couple of years ago when the new space policy was coming out. So I think one of the challenges in India is we talk a lot, but unfortunately when it comes to technology adoption, I think we still are not on par with a lot of other countries. I think our sort of ambition should purely be coming from that point of view. Why do I say that? Because sometimes the requirements of the country are not spelled out, particularly in the defense sector. And there seems to be some sort of a gap, which I think of late is kind of getting bridged with more startup involvement in these conversations around national security, which I think is an absolute requirement. This actually will sort of pave way for industry to understand what is actually needed and where they can actually jump in and make those contributions in that sense. Secondly, I think one of the other challenges is, space insurance is a major concern. I think third-party liability is sort of an issue that has to be addressed. I think we have made this point with the government of India, and InSpace has been very receptive, and I think they're going to bring in those meaningful changes in order to like make sure it becomes easier in terms of investor confidence, particularly those VCs that are investing in startups will definitely find it more favorable in that sense. The third one is, of course, guaranteed procurement. I think that is where, again, we should look at it from a technology adoption point of view, because unless you have guaranteed procurement by the government or other agencies, like we discussed in the last panel, by the police or other intelligence agencies within the country, it sort of becomes difficult because the numbers are always small when it comes to the space sector. So in order to like have that sort of brought into the picture as a part of the industry level and government to business conversations, I think it will become very important going forward.
Thanks, Samir. This is, policy and regulatory challenges are foremost, especially when, we are looking at such a trade. So over to you, Anubhav. This is, as Boeing, you are well aware of India's localization ambitions, and you are supporting them by having your own localization program. But there are now more space programs coming up in which Indian companies have to be lead, such as SBS-3. We have seen interest from some of the Indian companies, of course, but how can US space companies could offer a tech partnership to the Indian defense companies in this particular field, since you already work significantly in the defense side?
Yeah, I think the perspective there is primarily the model that we are looking forward, and I'll take a cue from, again, the defense side of it, is how can there be elements of co-development and co-production. And we obviously work, we have, for example, a small satellite focus company, which is Millennium Systems, which has sent multiple missions with 100% success rate. So there is technology which is there. However, we need to understand what are the synergies and how those synergies could be sort of integrated with Indian companies, and find the right partner or solution to sort of evaluate and have an approach on the go-to-market together. But I feel that there is enough and more opportunities, and we as an organization are really open for co-development, co-production as being the model for future.
Thanks. Over to you, George. I'll ask you two quick questions before we open the house for questions. One is that we have a very good, vibrant space startup ecosystem. And so do you envisage, as you're looking at India, any of these startups solving some of your problem or some of the challenges as you build these commercial modules? And secondly, Sameer talked about some regulatory challenges. But you, from a US perspective or international perspective, what is that which India could do better in terms of regulations, in terms of market access?
Sure, great question. I will just very quickly, I made an observation that, Gaurav, somehow you didn't get the memo on the dress code. Because apparently we're all wearing the requisite dress code. So, no, just kidding. I would say that there's so many opportunities. So when we talk about space stations, oftentimes people get very focused on building the module. But in reality, the module is maybe only 1/10 of the total cost, life cycle cost of that facility. And so resupplying that facility means rockets, it means capsules, and it also means payloads that need to go up and service that facility. And so a couple of things I've noticed in the Indian startup ecosystem is, there are a couple of companies now working on reentry vehicles. I think responsive return vehicles is definitely a very interesting area of development. I've noticed that, going into the next decade, we're going to have a number of large, heavy lift launch vehicles, and NGLV might be one of those. And of course, there's New Glenn, there's Starship, and there may be others. And so I think we're entering into an era of large volume, low unit cost logistics to orbit. But sending things up in large volumes is great. It helps drive down the cost, and it may make research on orbit more responsive and faster. But then when that research is done, you want to bring your thing down on demand. And so I think on-demand return vehicles, as well as launch and logistics, is going to be a significant portion of the budget of the operating of the station, and a real opportunity for India. Not to mention there's all sorts of other interesting things like electronics, body panels, and radiators, and all sorts of different area of technology that India is well equipped to support. And I think your second question was on regulatory.
What is that one or two things in India in terms of it can be regulatory, market access, QCOs, where you like the needle to move?
So actually, from what we're doing on an international collaboration basis, the policy issues are not so much, I'll call it domestic policy issues, but things that we need countries to agree on. And I think one of the opportunities in this style of collaboration that we're putting together, this consortium, is the opportunity for India and frankly all the other early members of this consortium to set the standards, the rules of the road of how we're going to work together on large international projects in orbit. So liability, both commercial liability, criminal liability, what happens if one astronaut punches another? It's not something you ever hope will happen, but if it happens, then what do you do? And those precedents will extend from low Earth orbit to the moon and to Mars. And so that to me seem like a sort of a funny example, but there's also a lot more practical examples. Insurance, for an example. These are large objects. If there's a reentry event that's unplanned, how do the countries that are participating intend to mitigate that risk, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of international collaboration topics that I think India would actually be well represented to help shape.
No, thanks. I think what you are also meaning is that we need to have a, say, international treaty on space situational awareness on how to manage the, yeah.
So that's definitely one area where debris mitigation is certainly a topic of interest as well.
Thank you. And before I open the house for any questions, I would also like to say that having a partnership with US does also bring a lot of credibility in terms of some of the messaging. For example, during Operation Sindoor, if you take a mind back to our last escalation with Pakistan, there were a lot of questions that what did you hit in Balakot, etc. But this time, when the Indian Air Force and everybody showed pictures which were from Planet Labs, which were from NISAR, there were at least no questions within the in the international community that as to the authenticity of the results. So that's a very major messaging point we sometimes tend to overlook. Before I request my panelists for a short, say, last word, may I seek questions if there are any?
Thank you, Shailendra, for a very well informed panel. So you talked of Indus, right? India-US cooperation. So I just want to know from the panel, it could be Gaurav, it could be you and others, what's the future of Indus in the present geopolitical context, and what has been the tangibles till now since when it was launched? Specifics, please, if anybody.
So very quickly, so IndusX, we created 3 editions. They did give visibility to the Indian startups, and as a second order effect, some of them got, partnerships, both sides. They also got visibility in India. As regards the future, though, I think the organizations which are organizing it from both sides, DIO and DIU, they are not really, one is a Section 8 company and a second one is also more innovation focused. So they are not that hostage to geopolitics. Nevertheless, I think the way forward is to make it more B2B in such future partnerships so that anything which is B2B can always, has got a life of its own. So the B2B partnerships last better than, say, G2G partnerships, which sometimes fluctuate.
Thank you.
In fact, I used to bother Shailendra in his previous role on IndusX multiple times. Thank you, Shailendra, for always helping us. So as far as IndusX goes, I think one of the issues that I sort of flagged in a recent conversation with the governments was, I think it should not restrict itself to becoming a showcase or an exhibition. I think we need to identify those tangibles and make sure these challenges are given a stipulated amount of time to be worked on and innovated. So that is where the crux of the IndusX initiative is going to be.
Samir, I just want to know if any specific tangible thing which has actually happened out of Index, any tangible thing? No, I know PierSight thing and all, yeah, but it's resulted into a tangible outcome of prototyping.
So we were the winners of IndusX both from India side as well as our company in the US won it there. So from the India side, I can tell you we are already working with the Coast Guard. We finished 3 milestones, and the product is for detecting oil spills, where we are merging the coastal radar sensors and space-based sensors is ongoing, and we've already shown some success prototype there. That's with the Indian Coast Guard. From the US side, it helped us get a good entry into the US defense ecosystem. Post that, we could also win a maritime challenge with the NGA. So these were tangibles, particularly with respect to us. A company which was just 4 months old that time got significant foots in the door. So yeah, I can share that from my end.
Thank you, Gaurav. And last, say 30 seconds each before we move in for tea or a coffee break. No, we have one more question. Yeah.
So I think the elephant in the room is, I think all of the panelists have said there is a great potential for U.S.-India collaboration, but the worry is that what is it happening right now for the geospatial, for the geopolitical conflicts. U.S.-India is not really at its best stage, and a lot of companies are now actually founding its business strategy on the fact that U.S. will not support India, and that India will then bridge towards a more sovereign capability, and a lot of businesses are basing out of. So from a business perspective, especially from India, do you think this kind of instability will be kind of more permanent, or do you think this will kind of bounce back within a few years where U.S.-India will then enjoy a more friendly partnership at the G2G level, and how does that translate to B2B?
So I think this, I think, is a temporary phenomenon, is our trading at the moment. Of course, there definitely is a lot of room as far as the Indian economy goes in terms of initiating more reforms and sort of promoting ease of doing business. I think the government is actively working on a lot of these, especially rationalizing quality control orders is one of them, and looking at mutual recognition. Of course, all the trade agreements that India is signing with various countries, I think will eventually benefit in the long term. And as we speak, we are also expecting another delegation to come down to India for the trade talks with the US. So I think overall, this is a moment of reckoning also for us in some sense. And most certainly, there definitely will be some positive outcomes of this. Of course, every challenge is a big opportunity, like the old adage basically says. So I think we should not be pessimistic in that sense.
So maybe I'll start from George. 30-second, your final views. And
So I first of all, I see great promise in the Indian-U.S. collaboration. I think there's a lot already there, and well, one of the things I would say is it's great if we have common ambitions and common goals that we're trying to solve, and that will result in projects, whether it's a SAR satellite or an international space station, that both industries from the U.S. and India can collaborate on. I think that there's a lot of room for potential there, and the short-term issues that we may be facing. India will occasionally have its issues that are geopolitical, and the United States will have its issues that are geopolitical. But the foundation between the two countries, in terms of understanding, in terms of cross-cultural, in terms of industrial supply chain, those are not going away. And so we just need to ride the waves here a little bit, and I think everything is going to progress quite well into the future.
Yeah, I'll just want to add on to what George said, and I think it's up to us, which is companies, to maintain and strengthen that relationship. And just to give you an example, at this point of time, Boeing India is the largest site for Boeing outside of US, and we continue to invest, we continue to grow. We had a $200 million investment in our campus. We have done a $100 million investment in pilot training. We have done a large warehouse investment. So our investments continue to grow in India, and our commitment continues to grow. I think that will just ensure that all of these ebbs and troughs that happen in geopolitical eventually will get evened out, because the B2B or the person-to-person interaction is going to strengthen that over a period of time.
Over to you, Samir.
The points are more or less made. I think, like I said, I think it's important for both the countries to be a little more ambitious in the scope of activities that we're going to pursue going forward. Like, for example, the NISAR project that just got over, and of course the Indian astronaut that went to ISS. So I think we need to come together and identify what's the next big thing, which will actually promote a lot of commercial engagement between both the countries, and of course, bilaterally also it's going to strengthen the partnership. So that, in fact, I have a lot of other ideas. In fact, we should probably look at asteroid mining, because critical minerals seem to be a big conversation of late, and US and India are actually working and doing a lot of groundwork on critical minerals exploration and harvesting of them. So I think why not, we can also look at space as a potential opportunity for this.
Over to you, Gaurav.
Taking on from Sameer's point, despite the geopolitical scenario, both countries remain to be like-minded, and for us to be ambitious, it's very useful to tap into the matured US ecosystem as well as the VC market. So taking on from NISAR, I hope NISAR 2, 3, rather than building a single large $1.5 billion satellite, The future is privately building a constellation of satellites which can, do the job or take on from where NISAR leaves us.
Thank you. I thank all of you for your time, and to the panelists and the speakers here for their valuable insight. Thank you so much.